I am excited to be joined by Seattle Councilmember Kshama Sawant. She has been a member of the Seattle City Council since 2016, a member of the Socialist Alternative and Democratic Socialists of America. Councilmember Sawant was the first socialist to win an election in Seattle since 1916. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. How are you?
I'm good, and thank you so much for having me.
The pleasure is ours. I want to begin with the attacks that are occurring on you in Seattle, specifically to recall you. And to me and everyone who's looking, it looks like it's a direct attack based on your efforts fighting for working people for the $15 an hour. Could you just kind of help us understand the nature of this recall effort?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it all connects back to how, as you mentioned, Ben, we won our first election in 2013, in the fall of 2013. And since then, we have won 2 re-elections. We won the historic $15 an hour minimum wage. We made Seattle the first major city to win the $15 minimum wage. Then just last summer, during the thick of the Black Lives Matter street protests, we won the historic Amazon tax, which is a tax to fund affordable housing and Green New Deal projects and Green New Deal jobs by taxing the largest corporations in Seattle, like Amazon, but not limited to Amazon. And then we have won a whole fleet of renters' rights victories that were thought of as impossible. And truly, having one socialist city council office that is truly rooted in the movement and is used, this office is being used by me and by others who work with me as an organ for working class struggle. It has won victories, not only that were thought of as impossible, but it has completely transformed Seattle's political landscape. We have forced the Democratic Party establishment that controls the city to reckon with working class politics. So it's no surprise that in the 7.5 years that we've been on the city council, they have thrown every possible attack against us. There's been lawsuit after lawsuit and numerous so-called ethics complaints, and I've lost count of those complaints and lawsuits. There were even some ethics complaints against us because we used the City Hall printer and copier to print leaflets and posters to build our movement, which we do proudly. We don't apologize for it. But the point is that they have tried all kinds of attacks. The Amazon spent more than $1 million to try and defeat our re-election in 2019. None of that worked. So now they have this recall campaign against us. The recall campaign has 4 charges. All of them are completely false charges. They claim that we broke the law, that I broke the law, but we didn't break the law. In reality, it is a retaliation against working people actually feeling empowered, not just to fight back, but having the temerity to win victories that go in the face of corporate domination. And so, it's no surprise that there's this attack against us. It is also part of the attack against the nationwide Black Lives Matter movement, because 2 of the 4 charges against me are because of my involvement in the Black Lives Matter movement here.
And it's just so much there for us to unpack. But what stood out to me is the fact that Amazon itself literally spent $1 million to try to defeat you. And when that didn't work, now you're fighting against all of these headwinds from people who are, for lack of a better phrase, nitpicking every little thing that you do in order to justify getting rid of you. And it's not, in most cases, when we do these analysis, especially in like mainstream media or even sometimes the independent media, we talk about this being an assault from conservatives. But as I'm listening to you, this is not, you're not just getting attacked from the right, you're getting attacked from people who like to claim to be the party of working people. You're getting attacked by some Democrats. Could you unpack that a little for me?
That's a very important point, Ben. And a lot of what's happening here also connects to what's happening in Washington, D.C. and why the $15 an hour minimum wage didn't really see the light of day and hasn't seen the light of day so far, and what would it take to see to actually come to fruition. I mean, if you look at the recall campaign donors, I mean, many of them are right-wing people, but if you look at the billionaires who are donating to this campaign, many of them have donated both to Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And Seattle as a city is controlled, as I said, by the Democratic Party establishment. For as long as I have known, the mayor has been a Democrat, and all of the council members are Democrats, except when I got first got elected, then we had one socialist, one working class representative in City Hall. And so not only do we see the Democratic establishment really behind this recall campaign as well, but when we ran for re-election in 2019, for example, in the primary election, two of the Latina progressive Democrats on the city council ran a candidate against me, saying that they agreed with the policies that I was pushing for. They just did not like me, and they don't think that I have good relationships. This is the kind of rhetoric that we see whenever working people will start fighting back. And so we have to refuse to accept that, and we have to hold politicians accountable. And of course, there are clear differences between the Republican Party and especially the reactionary elements like Trump. And it was an important repudiation of Trump's reactionary agenda that the majority of working people voted him out. But at the same time, we can see, for example, when there were millions of people demanding $15 an hour, it was the Democrats in the White House, the Democrats in Congress that were an obstacle to it. And so I think if you look at how we won $15 an hour in Seattle, for example, we won $15 an hour precisely because we didn't use that kind of relationship insider deal strategy. We turned outwards. We used my office to build the 15 Now movement, which then went nationwide actually and won $15 victories in other cities like Minneapolis as well. But what we did was we used our office to build a fighting strategy, empowering ordinary people and workers. And I'll just mention what 15 Now in my office with our socialist fighting strategy, what we overcame was not only the opposition of big business and the overtly corporate Democrats, we also overcame the cautious instincts of the well-meaning progressive Democrats and the well-meaning labor leaders who don't want to go into conflict with big business.
I think that's so critical. Like the timidness and the reluctance of people who actually agree with us on policy, not being willing to fight head on in these fights. But if they take a look at what's happening to you, I guess that's why they're afraid, because they know that as soon as they challenge this corporate structure that has us stranglehold across the country, that all of those forces come down to bear. I want to ask you about the fight for labor across the country too, and I want to kind of juxtapose it to the lie that 15 an hour was going to hurt Seattle, and I know that now we have enough evidence to suggest otherwise, but then also with the fight across the country, the standard talking point is that if we raise the minimum wage to 15 an hour, then the price of our hamburger is going to go up and it's going to cause inflation across the country. Could you talk about the actual data that has come out of Seattle since you all won 15 an hour?
Well, absolutely. The data shows without any doubt that $15 an hour has not had any detrimental impact on the on the Seattle economy. What has happened now, of course, is the COVID pandemic and the recession that is rooted in the crisis of the capitalist system itself. So it's not like $15 an hour has caused any damage. And to go to your earlier discussion, taxes on the rich has never destroyed the economy. What is destroying people's lives, the lives of the majority under capitalism, is capitalism itself, because capitalism as a system is not geared. It's not meant. The goal of capitalism is not to improve living standards for everybody, to employ the technology and the creativity to make sure everybody has what they need. The goal of capitalism is to maximize profits for the wealthy by exploiting workers. And that means they also use racism and sexism, those kinds of specific oppressions, also to make sure that they keep the working class in a state of repression as a whole. And so $15 an hour and the Amazon tax, they represent reforms under capitalism that are wrested out of the hands of big business and the Democratic and Republican establishments, despite their unwillingness to concede. And what we see from the data, not only now after $15 an hour has taken effect in Seattle, but even before that, it was very clear that what the economic evidence showed was that there was was not going to have any detrimental impact. There was not going to be any business that was going to close, and there was not going to be any economic apocalypse, which, everything was claimed. None of those claims had any basis in reality to begin with, but also now we have the proof that it doesn't work. I'll tell you one thing, though, that even if there was any truth, that this economy, this model of economy, capitalism, was so fragile that it could not withstand ordinary people, the workers who create the profits for the billionaires, that they could have even a modicum of living standards. $15 an hour is far from what is needed actually to meet people's daily requirements. But if the system is so fragile that it cannot withstand that, then it's an argument against the system itself. It's not an argument against $15 an hour. And that's why I'm a socialist, because I don't believe, as hard as it will be to win reforms, even like $15 an hour, let alone Medicare for all, that's not going to be enough. We need a real overhaul of the society itself, because it's not working for most of us.
Whew. My God. Wow. Thank you so much for everything that you're saying. I have more questions, but I'm just absorbing everything that you're saying, and the passion with which you speak and the conviction with which you speak is so refreshing to hear, especially from somebody who's been in power and because of what you fight for, you have become a target. Let's go to Bessemer, Alabama, where there's a fight for unions to unionize Amazon, and the amount of corporate power that is brought down to bear against these unionizing efforts, to me, is a joke. It's a joke in terms of our democracy, because they're allowed to do these things in the first place. But show us how it's connected, right? The fight for 15 across the country versus the fight to unionize there in Bessemer, Alabama.
Absolutely. I mean, the union struggle in Bessemer, Alabama is absolutely crucial right now. In fact, it is important to note that if there is a victory for the union there, for the workers there, it will be nothing short of a game changer for the labor movement and for worker struggles as a whole in the United States, given this unprecedented moment of crisis that we are in. And you can see the lengths to which the Amazon Corporation, the executives, the billionaires, not just Jeff Bezos, but the new CEO and everyone else that controls that corporation, the lengths that they are going to try and defeat this union struggle, the lies that the workers are relentlessly confronted with. The workers are telling us they cannot even walk from their workstation to the bathroom without seeing a number of anti-union messages pasted on the walls. The corporation is spending $10,000 a day, or maybe upwards of that, with these anti-union consultants. So you can see that it is similar. The attacks against unionizing efforts are similar to when the labor movement was first beginning over 100 years ago, when the capitalist class employed very, very brutal measures to try and prevent the labor movement. The labor movement happened in any way, and I think the courage and the political clarity that it will take to really build these kinds of union struggles is similar to the kind of clarity we have needed to withstand attacks from corporations here in Seattle as well. So the point is that the way in which we have refused to become part of the establishment and use our office as a way to build working class struggles, like turning outwards and not relying on the goodwill of the Democrats on the council, that is the kind of political courage that we will need on the part of labor leaders as well. In fact, a few years ago, the teachers in West Virginia, they won a historic victory precisely because they had the courage and the understanding that they should reject the deal that was made by the higher up union leaders, the state level union leaders with the Republican legislature. The rank and file union leaders there, they rejected that deal. They continued their strike action, and that's how they won the historic victory. I mean, this is Joe Manchin's state, right? So it shows you the potential that we can, of what we can win, and the potential of turning around this nation through just a historic labor movement around the country. But that is not going to happen unless we have leaders who understand that there is no way of making those gains possible without yourselves becoming targets of the corporate establishment and the ruling class, because they are not on your side. The interests of the capitalist class that these politicians represent and that the Democratic Party unfortunately represents are never going to be aligned with the interests of the working class. These are diametrically opposed to one another. And so you cannot rely, to fight for the working class, you cannot rely on the party that represents the opposite class, the ruling class, the capitalist class. And the potential for uniting Black, white, Latino, immigrant workers is tremendous, but we need that kind of fighting struggle.
And absolutely, I mean, just hearing your voice on this issue just is the type of fire that's necessary to push us in that direction. I just want to ask you one last question. One of the number one things that I get pushback on is when I identify as a Black socialist, as a socialist in general, for the very reasons that you've outlined here. But then I listen to what's happening to you on the Seattle Council, City Council, and it's like, to me, that fight represents what we should be fighting in this country. And this is what I mean. There are Democrats on that council who have made themselves an enemy of the people in attacking you. And then there you are representing the left, representing working people. To me, that's the spectrum that we need to be fighting on. But instead, not only are we fighting corporate Democrats, we're fighting fascistic Republicans. We have this insanely wide range in the discourse here in this country. And for so long, it never included people like voices like yours, because we were relegated to the dregs of society. We were McCarthyism chased us away. They try to vilify anyone who identified with anything other than this pure capitalistic system. My question to you is why do you feel it's necessary to identify as a socialist for people who are still afraid to identify that way when none of us got capital? Like, why is somebody calling themselves a capitalist when they don't have any capital? Could you speak to that?
I think that's very important, and it's interesting. The kind of period that we're in is so remarkably different from the period that many of our parents' generations were in, the Cold War era, where there was all this vilification of the ideas of socialism, and a lot of it was demonized. I think, obviously, we have a lot of work to do. As you were saying, Ben, I totally agree with you. We have a lot of work in clarifying what socialism means, and I want to do that in a second. But I think it's also important to recognize that the younger generations, millions of young people actually haven't grown up under the shadow of the Cold War. What they are, they may not understand what socialism is. Some of them may even have some ideas of hostility towards it. But predominantly what I see around us in the nation is a lot of curiosity about socialism, increased support for socialist ideas. But what's the bottom line here? The bottom line is that tens of millions of Americans are crystal clear what we have right now, that's not working for us, So we want a different kind of society. And so, in fact, the Black Lives Matter street protest, which ended up becoming the largest street protest movement ever in U.S. history, with 26 million people out on the streets in a multiracial working class solidarity against racism and police violence. That was not only an expression against oppression. It captured the overall anger that people are feeling about the way the system works. In the middle of the pandemic, you are seeing American billionaires becoming over $1 trillion richer, and not one single police officer who has murdered a Black or brown person has faced justice. So that people are understanding that this lopsided system does not work for us. We need something different, and it's no coincidence that my organization, Socialist Alternative, and especially Democratic Socialists of America, we have grown in leaps and bounds because so many people are searching for answers. And what I mean by socialism, of course, is a society that is able to harness the tremendous productivity, technological achievements, natural resources, and wealth of our society to guarantee a high standard of living for all living beings, all human beings, in an environmentally sustainable way. That's what socialism means. But it's just an abstract idea unless we actually fight for it. And the starting point of it has to be taking the commanding heights of the economy, the largest corporations like Amazon, the energy corporations in Texas that cause such suffering to 4 million people, the fossil fuel companies. We need to take these companies into democratic public ownership by workers so that we can, we can end the use of fossil fuels. We can actually usher in a real climate justice era, which we need to do because the ecological clock is ticking. But none of this is possible unless the working class, unless ordinary people, we get organized ourselves and unite against racism, against sexual violence, against the exploitation of workers. We need a real root and branch revival of the labor movement where we have genuine democracy inside the unions and we don't have business union leaders making deals with big business bosses. We need workers to fight for our own needs.
Whew. Seattle Council Member Kshama Sawant, thank you so much for your fight and everything that you're doing. How can people support you during this recall effort to remove you? Where should they go?
Thank you so much for asking that, because the left nationally and everybody who considers themselves progressive, who wants to defeat the conservative forces, who wants to defeat the billionaire class, has a stake in this fight and has a stake in defeating this recall. So please go to kshamasolidarity.org, which is Kshama, my first name, Kshama, solidarity, all one word, .org. It doesn't matter where you live in the United States. We need your help, first of all, starting with working class donations, because obviously our campaign is not funded by billionaires. The campaign against us is funded by the billionaire class. Yes. So we depend on working class donations. We depend on working class solidarity. And we know that this is what's at stake. If we are able to defeat this recall, then it will send a tremendous surge of confidence for working people everywhere that we can defeat Amazon, we can defeat the establishment. But if we don't defeat them, if the recall wins against us, then I have no doubt that they will use that as a template to go after other socialists, other labor activists, even media people who are actually on the left. So we have to remember that we are in this together, because those attacks are not against an individual. Those attacks are against the movement and the mood of revolt that is developing in this nation.
Seattle Councilmember Kshama Sawant, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.